In order to successfully communicate with people from different cultures and business, it's important to proactively learn how to deal with cross-cultural differences. Communication is a key foundational difference that can help or hurt your team. In order to cover the foundations of cross-cultural communication, we will briefly be covering verbal communication, nonverbal communication, and use of English as a common language. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to understand the differences between high and low context communication, understand how nonverbal communication can differ across cultures, and be aware of language when speaking with non-native English speakers. So, I want you to imagine you're ordering a second drink at a restaurant. What sounds more familiar to you? Another Coke, please, or another, please? If you said another Coke, please, this is likely because Americans are low context communicators, while others may take into account the surrounding situation and still get the point across with another, please. These are considered high context communicators. Now, this is a very simple example of how high versus low context communication can differ, but is an important aspect of cross-cultural communication barriers that might come about. High context communicators tend to rely on indirect and implicit messages with high use of nonverbal communication and low reliance on written communication. In high context communication, a message cannot be understood without background information. Emphasis is put on what is meant, not what is said. In low context communication, more of the information in a message is spelled out and defined. Low context communicators are direct, simple, and clear, and what they say is what they mean. They have a low use of nonverbal communication and place emphasis on sending and receiving accurate messages directly and by being precise with spoken or written words. When a high context communicator is speaking with a low context communicator, there is potential for misunderstanding. This can be seen with different communications across cultures. However, it is important to note that all cultures fall on a spectrum of these contexts, and there are generalizations. There may be differences depending on the personality of the person and the types of relationships. For example, Americans tend to be low context communicators, but in familial relationships, they tend to be more high context. In general, though, when working with people from lower context cultures, such as Germans, Scandinavians, or Americans, be as clear and specific as possible. Explain exactly what you want and assert your opinions. If you don't understand something, ask for clarification. When working with people from higher context cultures, such as Arab, African, or Chinese people, practice listening more carefully and learn to listen to what is meant instead of what is said. This likely means reflecting more, asking clarifying questions, and learning to pick up on implicit cues. To pick up on those implicit cues, you'll want to pay attention to nonverbal communication, including eye contact, touch, gestures, physical space, facial expressions, posture, and paralanguage. These cues can vary across cultures as well. Although you may not travel to the country, it is still helpful to understand these nonverbal communication cues to better understand high context cultures. Direct eye contact is important in North and Latin American cultures, while avoiding eye contact is seen as respectful in Asian countries. Touch, gesture, and facial expressions have different meaning in different cultures. Cultures also have different preferences for physical space. For example, in Latin American cultures, less personal space is needed than in North American cultures. Posture can also determine how someone views you in a different culture. In the United States, standing with hands on hips may suggest power or pride, but in Argentina, it may suggest anger or a challenge. Paralanguage refers to factors of speech such as accent, pitch, range, volume, or articulation, as well as the meaning of silence. In Britain, for example, people use volume to convey anger, while in India, they use it to command attention. Paralanguage may even come up in conference calls. When international business professionals take the time to learn what isn't being said, everyone benefits. Not only will their efforts decrease the likelihood of misunderstandings, they will improve their abilities to negotiate, solve problems effectively, create good working relationships, and become better global citizens. Before visiting a country, it may be helpful to do research on the communication styles of the country to become familiar with the norms. I also want you to acknowledge that not everyone speaks English as a first language, or even speaks English. Although English is considered the dominant language of international business, everyone has different levels of confidence when speaking English. To help facilitate clear cross-cultural communication, speak slowly and clearly to give people time to understand. But don't slow down too much, as it might seem patronizing. Pause for understanding and give them time to ask questions, and keep it simple. Avoid slang. A non-native English speaker may understand the individual words you have said, but not the context or the meaning. As a result, you could end up confusing them or, at worst, offending them. For example, phrases like "we need to cover all the bases" or "you're on a roll" have completely different meanings to a non-native English speaker. Even ending an email with something like "see you later" may prompt a non-native English speaker to assume they should schedule a time to see each other again. These small adjustments may help foster better communication with non-native English speakers. To recap, low context communicators are direct, simple, and clear, while high context communicators place more emphasis on indirect and implicit messages. Nonverbal communication cues can change the meaning of a message in various cultures, and not everyone speaks English as a first language, so be considerate of how you communicate. Even if your cross-cultural team works remotely, these communication differences can still present themselves, and understanding these differences can help facilitate better cross-cultural communication. The rest of the page will talk about how some of these communication differences can present themselves in more common forms of communication for your remote cross-cultural teams.